Thank you everyone for coming to this. Is our fourth curator talk, and I'm Jemima Burrill, and I'm the curator at Now Gallery and the cultural consultant for Greenwich Peninsula. I've just got rid of my family. My daughter was just reading me poems, so come back to earth and enjoy this evening. I'm so happy to have Phoebe here with me this evening. As I'm sure you all know, I mean, she is, particularly at this moment of sort of uncertainty and chaos, it's really lovely to have a woman designer here who has a clear vision for a sustainable future for fashion, and also who's thinking long and hard about solutions for sort of but it's a solution-based design, I think, really is what Phoebe's all about. What I thought we'd do is, well, first of all, just say to everybody, please do sew. I've got my sewing kit, which my mum handed down to me, and I'm going to be sewing my grandmother's coat that definitely needs, it's kind of falling to bits. So I hope you'll all get your darning out or your sewing or your mending. And then we thought at the end of the talk, if you want to show something that you're working on, we'd love to see it, because really, I mean, the importance of mending, not chucking out, has got to be really thought about these days. So do we'll come back and look at that at the end of the evening. So I'm going to ask Phoebe about 8 questions, and we're also going to share some images of Phoebe's work. And we'll start off with looking at the Now Gallery exhibition that she had with us. We'll move on to sustainable fashion, and then we'll finish off with possibly, I think Phoebe would say, the most important element, which is emergency design network, which we'll talk about later. I'm not going to give Phoebe a massive introduction because I really am hoping that her ideas and practice will come through as we talk. Most importantly, after sewing, please will you get on the chat, feedback to us, because sometimes, well, actually, it just feels like we're in a bit of a vacuum, and we want to know that you're listening, and we want to hear from you. We want to give us some questions. We'd love some questions. Magda will be feeding those to us at the end of the talk. So we want to hear your thoughts, and also we'll be sending you some relevant links. So just get on the chat. That would be really fantastic. I think, Phoebe, in fact, I'm going to share this first. So we're going to go into the images. So Phoebe, you were the first commission for Now Gallery, the first fashion commission. And I saw these 2 works of yours, this ship and this sphere. And I knew that you were not only a designer who could design, clothes that made people feel good, but you also could design other kind of extraordinary things. And that's why I kind of got in touch with you and decided that you might be an interesting person to work with. So I just wondered if you could sort of talk to me a little bit about these 2 works and how they fit into your practice.
Yeah, of course. I mean, these were done, hello everybody, by the way. I haven't actually said hi. I hope you were all sewing during this talk. So these are two I guess installations I did for a shop called Dover Street Market, which a lot of you I'm sure will already know of. During that time, they often invited the smaller designers they worked with to launch in their store by giving them a window space to sort of create I guess a vision, or I guess a kind of display of the collection that they might have in the shop. And I guess because I have a lot of artists in my family, and maybe I didn't, I kind of inherited an art eye, maybe more than a dresses eye potentially. So my natural reaction when invited to do things in these spaces was to not necessarily do clothing, but to do sort of the essence of what the collection was about and what it meant, with a physical object or a physical manifestation of that wasn't necessarily clothing. So the first one I did for them was the sphere, and I'm a textile. I'd studied textiles at St Martin's, so I did fashion with knitwear. So sort of handmade textiles were quite a key part of what I was doing at that time, and what the label was sort of based on, that process of hand making and having a tangible physical link between the thing you design and the thing that you make. So the sphere was basically a giant ball of the glass beaded textile that we had included in that particular collection, which I think was spring summer 13.
Was that, I mean, if we go on to the Now Gallery installation, that beading from the sphere, did you use that? Is that similar?
Yeah, so that's the same technique. It was with a much longer bead and much narrower bead, but it was the same. It was the same pattern. So it was basically like making lots of necklaces, and then on each joint, in between where each bead joined, we would put some other beads, some squares, or a triangle, or just a sort of stick, and it made this. When it was threaded into a grid structure, it became sort of spiky and sort of shaggy in a way, and we left all the threads hanging from doing that stitching. So it was, the process of making fashion is something that I've always found quite interesting. Not only sort of the finished, final, polished thing, but the actual activities and the processes that go into making those things. I always like to try and reference or keep in there somehow. So that's what those were. So I guess
you told, I can't. There was I remember we knew exactly how many beads there were. Can you remember? I mean, it was an astounding amount of beads.
I really can't remember. I really can't remember.
But I remember that actually the first idea you came up with before this was this amazing idea of having a big mound of pins, which we really loved the idea of, and then we kind of worried about the health and safety of having a giant, which was crazy. But actually,
it was going to be a sand dune in the whole gallery, made out of just loose mountains of pins. I think that's the one that was the original idea, was this whole sand dune landscape.
It would have been
but it would have probably been too ambitious and probably a bit dangerous.
What I liked about this exhibition you did, you also looked at your process and looked at how the materials that you use. I mean, you can see on the right hand side, the kind of complex way that you deal with material. And do you want to talk a little bit about that collection that I hope people can see?
Yeah, so I mean, within the show we did together, there was the beaded piece that you can see on your left, and then we also, I think it was 8 cabinets that we had across the space, and each cabinet held I guess traces or elements or sort of mementos from each collection. And I think in fashion, there's always this sort of, the way people actually experience fashion is often in quite a sort of polished way. We see fashion pictures in a glossy fashion magazine, and we see images that are heavily retouched, and you never really see the sort of the backstage elements and processes that go into making those things as much. So I think with the cabinets, what I was keen to include were things like the garment labels, and the little, you can see on the bottom right, the little sanding block of to make the beads fit better, be a better size, and the sketchbooks, and some of the tools that we used to make some of the textiles that were being displayed. So it was sort of a more thorough display of the work, rather than it just being a finished final photo or a finished final garment. You got to see some of the elements that went into its creation, I guess.
Yeah, the only other designer that's done that for us is Richard Malone, and I think what is lovely about it is it gives you a sense that clothes don't just arrive finished. So actually there's thought, there's sketches, there's photography. They have to work well on particular models for a particular show. And I think that it sort of, it illuminates, and it gives people a understanding of actually how complex it is to be a fashion designer, I think, which is really good.
I think that part of it and that element of it is really important to, I think when people see things, especially with sort of online shopping, you just kind of assume that someone's waved a wand and it's just appeared out of nowhere, and you click a button and it arrives in your house and it's, a finished thing. And we are quite removed from the processes that go into making clothes, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later. But I think that side of things is really interesting, and it's one of the reasons why I like doing what I do.
This is another view of it, which I thought everybody should see. The sort of close-up as well works so well. Obviously this Now Gallery is on Greenwich Peninsula, and this is a special place for me, and I think we're really missing going to work there at the moment with its kind of river that runs around it. And I think that we're looking for a sort of a sense of optimism and excitement, which I think your work really has. I think your work has a sense of optimism. And I was just wondering, when you are working, I was sort of curious to find out about materials and textiles and fabrics, and actually, how they've changed from 2015 to now.
Yeah. So in terms of which ones I've been,
well, I think we talked before, and you said there are a certain, well, for instance, plastic, that you're certainly not going to be using.
Yeah. I don't know if was that on the next slide? I'm not sure if that was. I can't remember. But I guess that, so this, we have been over the past couple of years. I think there's almost a fetishization of the idea in design. The idea is God, and, everything has to go towards doing that idea and making that shape in the exact color, with the exact silhouette, with the exact shape and form that is part of the idea. But in sort of recent years, I've had begun to realize that actually the idea wasn't actually enough anymore. And I mean that in terms of our planetary boundaries. So in terms of how sort of resource expensive fabric production is, and we were making really sort of quite concrete decisions about sort of removing single-use plastic from the studio and from our packaging. And the next step after that was to remove plastic from our clothing. So any synthetic fibre, so acrylic, polyester, nylon, those things are just fossil fuel. They're oil, they're fossil fuels, they're plastics, and they're petroleum. They're the bad stuff that is contributing to the quite serious situation we are in as a planet. So I decided that I wanted to phase the use of that out in my work. So so just sort of thinking carefully about, do we really need to be using fabrics which are fundamentally plastic? That it's quite a damaging process to produce those materials, but also the damage they cause doesn't really end, after you've made it into the garment. That it continues to damage the planet after it's been constructed, during the washing process. So with things like microplastic and microfiber shedding during washing machine processing, and a lot of those end up obviously in the oceans, which fish eat, which we then eat, or they end up being taken from rivers in water that's used to water crops, and the field dries, then the wind blows and it goes into the air, and then we breathe it in. So, you know, fundamentally we're eating and breathing in our own plastic clothing. So yeah, I wanted to sort of make a move away from using that particular type of fabric. You know, fashion is fundamentally, if you're working in fashion, you are in a place of influence, because what you are fundamentally doing is deciding what is fashionable and what is not fashionable. So, you know, if everyone decided that were the people that were deciding what's fashionable decided that virgin plastic fabric wasn't fashionable anymore because of the way it affects the planet and the earth in its production and in its usage, you know, those garments will never break down. They'll be around for hundreds of years. You can watch footage of people, you know, digging down into landfill and finding completely fully formed dresses made from polyester that haven't changed at all, and they're from decades ago. So, you know, I think thinking about raw materials has become something that's much more prevalent in my work, and my work, you know, it doesn't go towards the idea, it sort of starts at the back, if that makes sense, and then goes forward towards the idea. So I've sort of tried to flip it around to make sure that some of the things that are going into what we're doing are, you know, that's the most important thing, if that makes sense.
I mean, what you've said, which is that the fashion industry is one of the most damaging industries, you know, you've kind of got to look at that, haven't you? I mean, you know, if you take that on board, but it's a whole lot of I mean, you know, you've just talked about a huge amount of elements in fashion that people are going to have to address. I mean, it's huge. But also, I'm interested, and I think that's interesting in terms of what you talk about, you know, coming at it from the back. Do you then look at, I mean, how does your design process happen in that case?
Well,
Is your aesthetic guided by being sustainable? I mean, is that what happens?
Well, that's quite an interesting question, and there is something I wanted to say before talking about this side of what I do, and just to explain that this is something that I, as a designer, am still learning about myself, and I'm by no means an expert at all. There are some really clever people who really are experts, but it's something that, you know, I feel is important to bring into my practice and bring into my business, and it's something we've been working quite consistently on over the last 2 years. But yeah, in terms of how it affects the final outcome, I think for me, what I was really keen on doing when I thought I should sort of start tentatively figuring out a better way to be doing things is, in a very nervous way, because it's a very, very big subject and it can be very intimidating and overwhelming to know exactly where to start, because there's a huge amount of information, and sometimes it's quite hard to know what the information you should be following. But I think what was important for me was that you know, it was in an imperceivable change. So I didn't want, you know, I didn't want it to look like a before and after version of events. So I wanted it to be an imperceivable change, because I don't think things have to look sort of in a stereotypical eco-fashion way for it to be less damaging, if that makes sense. And it was important for me that I could try out some of these techniques and try out some of these materials and some of these ideas, but do it without any perceivable change to the aesthetic of my work, and which has worked, I think. But you know, it does sometimes confuse, you know, stockists and things like that. You know, they ask you like, well, it doesn't look eco, like it doesn't, you know. So but I think we're at a point where we are able to redefine what that does look like. So that's something I've been, thinking about as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. What I would love it is if you could talk about next your latest collection, because I love this map that you gave us.
Yeah.
Have a look at.
Well, so this kind of links back to the other slide as well. So maybe we can go in between the two. But this is, I guess, this is the invitation for the most recent body of work that I did. So this is a map of all of the locations of our raw materials. So we'd been working towards replacing virgin resources. The first collection we did, so when I mean virgin resources, I mean using things that are surplus, using fabrics that would be chucked away or not used or left, kind of hanging around, and basically to make fabric you need a huge amount of water, you need a huge amount of carbon, there's a huge amount of people power, they travel vast distances, and as the planet changes and as the planet heats up, making things like virgin cotton in countries that are really, really hot using hundreds of gallons of water, that's going to start not fitting in to how our world is changing. And I think as designers we need to be one step ahead of things like that. So I made the decision to try and phase out the amount of virgin resources that were being used in the collection. So the first collection I did, we started to put in, maybe I think we use about 20% reclaimed materials, so making sure all of our scraps are saved in the studio. And then obviously, as I'm a textile designer, we were able to design ways of using those things back into the new collection. So we started with 20%. The next collection we did maybe 40. The collection after that was about 70% reclaimed fabrics. And this was the most recent collection, and I wanted it to be entirely from reclaimed fabrics. So nothing new, no new fabrics at all. And I also wanted it to be made from fabrics which hadn't been flown, hadn't come on an aeroplane, hadn't used the huge amount of carbon to fly and ship things. And London's a really, really big city. So the it was like a challenge to see, there's a lot of creative people that live here. There are a lot of designers. It was kind of like, can I do a whole collection from fabric which just is already here that people aren't using anymore and don't want, and I could potentially purchase it from them? So that's where the concept came, and this is a map of where all the locations were of the different studios we got fabric from.
But you got them from amazing Catherine Hamlet, Preen.
Yeah.
I mean, extraordinary.
Yeah, people were really generous, and also sort of pleased to kind of also get a bit of extra space in their studio. It was also illuminating, I contacted a lot of different studios, and a lot of studios actually don't have any fabric here in the first place because they're working with factories overseas, and they're sort of more studio offices rather than making spaces. So that was also really interesting. I mean, I think as a designer you're not necessarily going around and visiting other fashion designers' studios necessarily, or even really speaking to each other very much. So it was a really nice project to do where I got the excuse to be able to do that, which was lovely.
But also by talking to them about what they have available, you were then explaining what you're doing and talking about a sustainable practice to them in a way which, wasn't necessarily condescending, was just saying, this is what I'm trying to do. And then that opens up another dialogue, which must be really effective, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it was actually a really useful excuse to actually just be able to speak to people about some of the things we were working towards. And you never know where a conversation like that might go. And it was quite interesting to see so many studios we were working with were already doing those things, or already thinking about them, or already working in that way. So that was really illuminating and really nice to hear as well. And I think in the previous slide, that's So that the look on the right, the Spring Summer 20 look, that is actually the Catherine Hamnett fabric, one of the Catherine Hamnett fabrics, and the jacket is stuffed. It's full of offcuts.
Wow.
So the previous collection to this had a lot of silk organza in it, and we ask all of our manufacturers to keep all of those things so that we can have them returned to the studio and we can make use of them. Otherwise, there's not really very many recycling facilities available to manufacturers, and those things do tend to go into landfill, where they obviously won't biodegrade because there's no oxygen. So we try and use those bits up. So that's stuffed full of the previous collection. So it's the previous collection being made to make the new collection. So just trying to get some element of circularity in what's going on.
I've been talking with architects about the idea of the accidental architect, and a sort of far place ending up somewhere in a building in an unexpected place, but remaining there because it looks interesting. And in a way, I wonder if you're an accidental designer, because you've got a bit of Catherine Hamnett and a bit of Preen and a bit of somebody else, and you're using that fabric. I mean, you've got to be very imaginative and also quite well, have a lot of ingenuity to make sure that it works aesthetically, as we said. And we're going to go on. I was just going to go on to this one because I thought it'd be lovely maybe to talk a little bit about these different processes, if that worked. And I wonder how we're doing in chat. How are we doing with chat? Have we got questions? If we haven't got questions, can we have some? That would be brilliant. We're looking forward to having your questions. And I'm not doing any sewing at all because I literally cannot do this and this. It's too much. But I will be finishing my jacket, so I hope you're getting some sewing done. But it'd be lovely because this is I've forgotten what you call it when you're it's pattern when you do a pattern but you don't waste any fabric, no waste fabric patterning.
Yes, so zero waste pattern cutting, which actually isn't a new that's not a new technique. That's centuries old, because it's how people used to make kimonos, because there's obviously so much preciousness about a hand woven material. Those garments were designed to use every single centimetre of the fabric, because they understood the time and the resources that went into the material. So I think some of these things aren't about doing new things, it's about looking backwards sometimes in order to go forwards. So some of these pieces, so for example the piece at the top left, that's a piece which is made with long strips of fabric which are cut from exactly one edge to the other edge, and they're cut right next to each other, so there's no gaps. So you're using the whole width and you're cutting no gaps in between, so you're using exactly the whole amount of fabric, which is the most efficient way to use fabric in terms of money, but also in terms of making sure you're respecting it as a precious resource. And then it's draped on the stand in this irregular zigzaggy way. So yeah, I think it's a much slower technique of working because it is very technical. You're not necessarily doing a drawing and then drafting a pattern to the drawing in disregard to the material. You're sort of starting in a in a flat way, and it does often take a lot longer as a process than it would do if you were just drafting a pattern with round armholes. As soon as you put a circle or a curve in anything, you always automatically get some waste. Whereas if you're doing sort of a diagonal, or if you're doing straight lines, it's much easier to place the pattern pieces right up next to each other and reduce the amount of fabric waste that you're producing. So that's kind of one of the techniques there. And I guess the image on the lower right hand side of the white coat, so that's an example. So that's the organza that was used to stuff the jacket in the previous image, and this coat is made from some bamboo viscose dresses we made from the previous season. So it's kind of, it makes a chain, you know, you kind of use that up and move it on, and each collection kind of is holding pieces of the previous one, if that makes sense. So this was using cutout, so some of the offcuts from making the bamboo viscose garments, you know, they'd all been saved and scrunched up into a bag, and then it's a case of taking them out and ironing them out, and we were really using them in the shapes that the cutouts were naturally in, to kind of make sure nothing was masted from then. And then it's sort of laid in between two layers of the organza and trapped in there. And then when the production for the organza was made, then that was all saved and used to stuff the jackets for the collection afterwards. So it's a kind of chain.
It's incredibly complex, but seems like just such a good system. And I think if you're telling people about it, then hopefully they'll take it on board. The quilting, obviously, we've got on Now Gallery, we've got quilting. So if you're interested in having a go at quilting, Phoebe very kindly has given us some lovely drawings so that you can do that. The next slide is really have lost one. There was another one which just was of the latest collection, and everybody looked so incredibly glamorous. And it is, I think it's interesting, that idea that, you know, if it's eco, then it has to be kind of a bit rough and ready around the edges, or, you know, dodgy colours. And you've got this sort of very beautiful monochrome look that makes people feel good. I mean, this shirt, I can't remember, I don't know what season this is, but I've bought, this is a Phoebe English shirt, and I put it on and I just feel so good. And I think that actually that's what your clothes do. They make people feel fantastic, which is what you want, really. And we've gone on here. This is really, you're going to talk a little bit about a really fantastic thing that you've been doing. But what I also want to talk about is the way you create communities. And I had an email from Sadie Williams earlier, and it just seems that you are able to get in touch with people and talk to them. And you set up, I think, a WhatsApp connecting a sort of large and small studios to share ideas, which I imagine that sort of fashion isn't necessarily a particularly generous world, but it seems like in London there really is a kind of communication going on that is about sharing ideas.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there is a lot of smaller brands and smaller designers that were, you know, that have really been taking up the mantle of trying to make fashion less damaging and more positive. And that's, I think, really specific of London as a place. And I think that's a very exciting thing. You know, being a small company has a lot of really difficult constraints in terms of cash flow and time and people power, but it also has the benefit of, you know, if you want to make a change, or if you want to improve something or swap something or alter something, you can just do it the next day if you can afford it. And I think that level of agility and speed is something that's very, very important during a time of crisis, and we're in many different levels of crisis at the moment. So I think, yeah, bringing all of those people together who, you know, are looking for different ways of doing things and trying to kind of speed up the process by letting everyone speak to each other, was something that we thought would be a useful thing. You know, if you were trying to improve the type of fabric you were using, and you've never learned about sustainability, you don't know about fabric production, and you're sort of beginning, where do you start and who can you ask? So that some of us started to talk to each other, and it's something that you know, has grown and grown and grown, and it's grown into something that's actually quite big. And, you know, recently we've been trying to think of ways that we can make the space more supportive and more amplifying of voices which need to be heard the most in this conversation. So that's an ongoing project to make it a better space, because at the moment it's quite a busy space, but it's quite an unbalanced space. So it's something that yeah, we're trying to think of ways that we can improve that space so it's supporting people in the way they need to be supported and heard.
That, you know, I think that it sort of sounds unusual, and it shouldn't be unusual. I'm aware that we've got loads of questions, so I'm actually just going to show you one more slide, which is about emergency design and network. So if we just go to this one, and you tell us a little bit about this. I think this is very important to everybody, and we will be sending out links to this. So, you know, feel free to donate. If you want to donate, that would be great. But Phoebe, how did this come about? Because I mean, at this unprecedented, we're not allowed to say unprecedented time, but it is. This is what needed to happen, and you did it.
Well, it's a group of us. Yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic in the UK, some of us, I mean, quite a few designers were being approached by places like hospitals, people like, you know, doctors, parents of doctors, sisters of nurses, urgently looking for supplies of PPE or people that could help produce PPE items, you know, knowing after, you know, witnessing the horrors of what was happening in Italy, and knowing, and in other places in the world as well, in China, and across Europe, and realizing that, you know, we would be hit with this, you know, how could we support? So I think, so there's a designer, Holly Fulton and Bethany Williams, and I knew Holly from a long time ago, and I, you know, recently become known Bethany as well, and we, you know, all three of us were receiving these desperate pleas of people that, you know, were looking for these items and were really worried about their stocks of those, which is a really alarming thing. And we had a phone call, and we realized that we needed to come together and try and support these people who were putting their lives in danger in order to try and keep us safe for their job. You know, they were having to go to work and put themselves in harm's way in order to keep us safe. And how could we support with that? And then we joined forces with Cosette McCreary, who is a fashion connector, and, you know, we realized that in order to do it properly, we were going to need some help. So she came on board, and we built the Emergency Designer Network, so which is basically a case of joining skills up of volunteers who had the skills to be able to help. We don't actually produce PPE in this country, it's all produced overseas. And at that time, that very, very urgent time, and obviously we're still in a time of urgency, you know, the delivery of those items was being delayed, and you know, wasn't coming through fast enough to support the people that needed the support the most, really, at that time. And so it basically is a network of people who have making abilities. Obviously everyone is at home, no one's connected. Bethany and Holly had never even met in real life. We had to do everything on Zoom, and it was a case of hundreds of emails to try and connect everybody together. We started to work with you know, sponsorship, so volunteers from logistics companies as well that could help us start moving things around. And I think we did a lot of research in the first 2 weeks to work out what we could make safely. I mean, PPE is actually a very technical. They're they are, you know, fundamentally that it's clothing to go on your body to keep you safe, but also it's very technical clothing that's usually made in very specific environments and with very specific materials. And after doing research, we realized that we wouldn't be able to produce things like masks and stuff like that because we just didn't have the facilities or the abilities to make those particular items, but we would be able to make scrubs. So we settled on scrubs, and we have you know, a really fantastic fundraising platform and a GoFundMe page, which has managed to help support the purchase of materials. And I think to date we have made almost 7,000 sets of scrubs with over 150 different makers. And we've been working with people in Derbyshire, in Wales, in Scotland. And I think we've managed to support over 40 different hospital trusts, care homes, clinic.
You said it wasn't always the most obvious places. It was, you know, it was maybe mental health units that you just imagine that it's just the sort of main hospitals, but actually it's across the board. It's a huge amount of people that need scrubs.
Yeah, so you know, it's fundamentally clothing that helps keep people safe, and you know, they're very specific. They need to be very durable. People are wearing them for very long shifts, 12-hour shifts under extremely stressful circumstances, and in order to keep them safe, those items need to be able to be washed at very high temperatures, so like 90 degrees, to kind of to make sure they're clean and safe and can be worn again. Yeah, that's. It's been a very long and busy journey to try and support all these people, but the system's been linked together through email and through logistics, and we've now got to the point where we are beginning to try and develop some of the PPE. So we've been working with someone who's looking to try and produce fabric that's just as durable, but slightly thinner and slightly lighter, because when you're wearing the equipment, you know, the scrubs and the gowns and the masks and the visors, it's very hot and it's quite heavy when you have everything on. So we're trying to sort of, whilst this is going on, also try and use our skills as designers to try and develop and make things better as we go along, so it's performing slightly better. So yeah, and we've also been doing things like we've been working with Dazed magazine, who managed to you know, get a large quantity of masks. I think they got 50,000 masks from a contact of theirs, and they had donated it towards us so that we can then divide it up across the different hospital trusts and the different ambulance services and the mental health clinics, etc., to try and support with that. So we've been making scrubs, but we've also been developing things, and we're also looking at developing gowns as well. So you can't treat anyone with the virus unless you're wearing a gown. So the gowns are very important, but they have to be made with very specific fabric in specific conditions. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. So it's an ongoing thing that we're working on, and if there's anyone here that's able to head to the website and or get involved or support in any way, please do, so we can try and help keep people that are working in these environments as safe as we can.
We're sending all those details out, and I think one of the things that you talk about is disinheriting old systems, and I just think you are always looking to the new and always striving to see if there's another way of doing stuff. Now, I'm aware we've got loads of questions, so I'd really like to get those to you. Magda, I know, has been checking them out. So Magda, if you could join us. And
Hi.
this is Magda. We've got the Now Gallery team here, Kaya, Magda, and Alicia.
I can't see Magda. Is she there?
I'm here.
I'm going to, let's put it back on the, sorry, I'll stop my screen so we can actually see everybody. That'd be really nice.
Okay, so the first question is from Bethan, and she says, Phoebe, you spoke about your sand dunes of pins being something you thought was overambitious and a little dangerous. How do you mediate ambitions like these in gallery spaces and with gallery curators without losing too much of your intention with your collections and exhibitions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that was the first gallery I ever did anything, and Jemima was quite good at sort of bringing in the realities of the space and what happens in the space, and yeah, I think it would have been too ambitious and it would have been too dangerous, but I think, you know, my imagination had just spiraled into this this sort of fantasy that it would be possible. I think it would have been very hard and it probably wouldn't have been very practical, but yeah, so I learned a lot from Jemima during that project, and Kaya, and sort of learning about the restrictions of the space in terms of the circulation of the public and things like that. So yeah, it was a good learning curve, I think.
Right, thank you. The next question's from Tola, and he says, your approach to growth appears to be organic. If that is the case, it's commendable. Would you consider collections with other designers or brands, and if so, which ones?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're very, very small. We're a tiny team. We've been going for a while now, but we are very miniature, and we do really, really small collections. I think that was something I was hoping to work on going in, you know, at the beginning of the year, is sort of trying to see, you know, maybe I could try and work with some other people to make a collection, but a lot of things have happened since the beginning of the year, and I think we are just trying to think quite carefully about what we can do in the future, because it's quite a challenging time for making new work and things like that. But yeah, who would I like to work with? I don't know. I hadn't actually made a list yet. When I've worked with people before, I've quite liked working with people that have got a really opposite style from my own, and then I can yeah, and then it's like a challenge to see how those two things can come together. So probably someone with lots that does lots of print and lots of colourful things like that, because we're quite.
I was curious because the other designers obviously you've been working with Emergency Design Network. I mean, a lot, and Bethany is almost the antithesis of you in her brightly. This is Bethany Williams, her, you know, brightly coloured work. And I wondered if there was anything that actually, when you were, you know, just working together, whether you learnt anything from hanging out with those designers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of things I'm really not very good at. So I can't, like, if I see numbers, I see like a pattern rather than information. So there's lots of things like just reading a spreadsheet's really challenging for me. And I've learned a lot from Holly, Bethany and Cosette, because they're really good at a lot of things and they're extremely talented, and it does kind of highlight what you're really not very good at yourself. But also it's been a really sad time to be inside and to be watching, you know, the awful death tolls that have been being announced on a daily basis. And in a way it's actually been quite nice to be part part of something with them that can help. So yeah, I have learned a lot from all of them, because they're all really very, very clever, intelligent people, and it's been really inspiring to learn from them and to watch how they work as well, because I'm quite useless at so many things, and
so you're not allowed to put yourself down on the show. You're not allowed.
But I mean, like, I'm not. I can do some things okay, and like a lot of sort of practical things I'm not very quick or good at. So it's been really empowering to watch how they work and watch how good they are at things. So that's been and also to have the company whilst we've all been isolated, because we've had to be in contact so much throughout the day. It's been really overwhelming, that process, but it's also been quite reassuring that you're sort of constantly in touch with people that are on the outside, if that makes it, or not in your home.
I think we all feel that for sure. Sorry, Magda, I butted in. Next question.
So we had 2 questions about your colour palette. This one's from Kate, and she says, can you tell us more about your colour palette? It's very monochrome. Is it dictated by the materials you resource and choose to use?
Yeah, I think I'm probably a bit scared of bright colours, and I've never been very good at prints. I did a print in my when I was studying, and I failed the project, and I think it kind of knocked my confidence a bit with things like that. But I guess because some of the textiles we do are quite complicated, and there's a lot of layers and details, and I think sometimes when you have surfaces like that have lots of other things going on, so lots of different colours, sometimes you don't see the form as much. So I think sometimes I also wear quite a lot of monochrome clothing as well, so that's probably where we do use some bright colours, but maybe not as much as some other labels do.
But is it a decision that you is it just I like black better? I mean, obviously it's because of, do you think black look better, monochrome looks better?
I mean, I like to wear monochrome. I don't know, I think I like that it's almost quite a shy colour to wear as clothing, because you kind of you don't stand out too much when you're wearing it. And I guess I am quite a shy person, so I think that maybe that comes into it as well. Yeah. I'm not sure. I've never really thought why I use a lot of monochrome. I think it's really because I like the shapes and the textures of designing, and I think you can maybe see them more when there's not lots of loud colours going on. That might be one thing.
That makes sense. Magda, next question.
So another question that's just come in from Carolina, and she said, could you tell us some of your favourite books on sustainable fashion, zero waste or mending?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't actually read very. I mean, I know I've got loads of books behind me. I never really have time to sit down and read. My favourite books. Maybe I have to get back on that question and have a good little think about which one. You know what? Actually, no, I do know. So the ones that I probably use the most are the Fashion Revolution zines. Those are the ones I use the most, and the ones, so I have them in the studio so we can refer to them in the space. And I really encourage everyone to engage with Fashion Revolution and see what those guys are doing, because they do such incredible work. And they're just a really fantastic go-to place. A lot of the information is really easy to digest and understand if you're coming to that side of things from from fresh. So and you know, they support such amazing causes. So I definitely recommend the Fashion Revolution zines, and you can get them in a downloadable format or a printed format. In the past, you can choose which one, but it's really, you know, they have lovely illustrations and you know, fun making projects as well. So it's a highly recommended one.
That sounds really good. Now, what I thought now is we will see if anybody wants to come forward. I don't know how we kind of pinpoint them. I can see someone sewing right in front of me. If anybody wants to hold up something that they've been working on. There's a lady, and I can't see. I wonder if I can see your name. Yes, Anna. Anna, I'm going to unmute you. Do you want to tell us what you've been working on?
Oh, hello everyone. I've been sewing a cat. No reason. I like cats. Yeah, it's a cat.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. I love it. That's so
Thank you. And there's some popcorn spilled on him. I painted some parts in acrylic paint and just have been adding some embroidery for texture. But yeah, I'm actually just putting him on a bag.
That's
so yeah.
fantastic. Oh, we love that.
Is he a portrait of a cat you have? Is he?
Yeah, I have two cats, Ocean and Lagoon, and yeah, they're adorable little bunnies. Well, I call them bunnies. I know they're cats. It doesn't make sense. Don't question it.
That's so great. Thank you so much for sharing. I wonder, is there anybody else out there who we can see their work? I'm just having a scroll through. Is there anybody who wants to show us what they've been up to? Magda, can you see anybody? Oh yes, fantastic. Carol, that looks totally great. Tell us what you're up to there. Hold on, I will.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
You're doing some quilting.
Well, based on your instructions that you sent, I just fished out lots of tiny bits of material there from all kinds of things, and it's the first quilting I've ever done, and I'm absolutely loving it.
Oh, I'm so happy that you've done that. So, it's so nice to make things with your hands, and during a time which is so stressful and sad and traumatizing at the moment, like being able to do things with your hands and make things is it's really great that it looks really beautiful.
Thank you. It's all kinds of weird and wonderful things. That's my the cut off from my husband's trousers. That's a cut off of a dress. This is from some cushions. That's from some. That was actually something I bought in a charity shop. I was making into something for my granddaughter. That was something I bought and I made into something else for myself. That's part of a jacket I wore to my daughter's wedding. And this is some netting that I just bought. There's lots of layers of it. Anyway, I love it.
Oh, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. That's made our evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So everybody, I just want to sort of wrap up and just say thank you all for making this talk possible, because if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be having a talk. So thank you. There was a sentence that Phoebe said a while back, I think she said like 2 years ago, to correct me if I'm wrong. She said, when there is an emergency, you don't separate, you come together. And I think she really proves that kind of fashion can come together to sort of change things. I want to say thank you, Phoebe, for joining us this evening and really sharing an awful lot. I mean, we've learned a lot, so thank you. I also wanted to say that the wonderful Kaya is talking to the wonderful Morag Myerscough on the 23rd of June. So book that. That's going to be a real treat. It's sort of about colour and making hospitals better places with extraordinary design. So do sign up for that. And just again, a big thank you, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good evening.
And yes, and please do, if you can, please support or share the work of the Emergency Designer Network, because we are still working to provide those items to the places that need them, who are preparing for a potential second wave. So please do to share or engage with it if you have time. Thank you.
Yeah, no, the link has gone out there, and it's donate skills funds, and yeah, just get involved because it is essential in these days, and it's just one little thing that you can do to really help. So thank you, Phoebe, for sharing that with us this evening.
Okay,
Thanks everybody. Have a good evening.